to consume our product.
Senator Abetz, thank you. It being 2 p.m, we do need to move to questions without notice. Senator McAllister.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Women, Senator Payne. Last week, Senator Payne attended a meeting with Mr Morrison, Ms Archer and Mr Frydenberg. Who made the request for this minister to attend this meeting, and when was that request made?
The Minister for Women, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator McAllister for the question. I was already in the Prime Minister's office for a meeting on another matter, and I was asked to remain in the office.
Senator McAllister, a supplementary question.
Was the minister aware that Ms Archer had asked that the meeting be postponed?
Minister.
No. Thank you, Mr President, and in response to Senator McAllister's question, no, I was not specifically aware that there had been a request for the meeting to be postponed. I was simply asked to remain in the Prime Minister's office where I had been for another meeting.
Senator McAllister, a second supplementary question.
Can the minister confirm Ms Archer, in her own words, spent the first half of the conversation crying and apologising?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm not going to comment on a private meeting between Prime Minister and colleagues.
Senator Dean Smith.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck. How is the Liberal Nationals government responding to international developments in relation to the new COVID-19 variant of concern?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Senator Smith, for your question. As we've seen in the media over the last few days, Mr President, a new strain of COVID-19 first detected in southern Africa, known as the Omicron strain, has been declared a variant of concern by the World Health Organization. The Omicron strain has a high number of mutations within its spike protein. 3 cases of the variant have been detected in Australia in passengers arriving to Sydney and at Darwin, Mr President. 14 passengers from a Sydney flight from southern Africa, including 2 infected, are in quarantine, and the remaining passengers are isolating. 1 person at the Howard Springs quarantine facility has tested positive to the new Omicron COVID variant. Yesterday, the Minister for Health signed a biosecurity determination valid until the 12th of December, preventing people who have been in an Omicron high-risk country within 14 days from entering Australia, unless they are an Australian citizen, permanent resident, immediate family member of a citizen, or are otherwise exempt, including crew, diplomats and members of the Australian Defence Force. High-risk countries for this purpose are Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Seychelles, South Africa and Zimbabwe. Mr President, during this period, flights from these countries will not be permitted. Australian citizens, permanent residents and immediate family members who have been in high-risk countries in the 14 days prior to their travel will be permitted to return, but be required to undertake quarantine of 14 days in a managed facility. Mr President, the government has increased the smart traveller advice level for these high-risk countries in southern Africa to do not travel.
Your time has expired. Senator Smith, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How does Australia's vaccination rate compare to other countries?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Senator Smith, for your supplementary question. Mr President, on both the health and economic fronts, Australia has fared better than most countries in dealing with COVID-19. More than 92% of the eligible population over 16 are now protected against COVID-19 with a first dose, and more than 86% with a second dose. Of the 38 developed OECD countries, Australia has the second lowest number of COVID cases per capita. The UK and the US have more than 40 times the number of COVID deaths compared to Australia. For example, over 12% of people in the United States and 11% of people in the United Kingdom have had COVID. By contrast, 0.4% of Australians have had COVID. It's estimated that our program of support for Australians has saved more than 30,000 lives, Mr President, an important
Minister,
number.
your time has expired. Senator Smith, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How can Australians continue to prepare as new strains of COVID-19 enter the country?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks, Senator Smith. Very simple action that Australians can take. Get vaccinated. Vaccination continues to be our best defence against the virus. To provide even greater protection against COVID-19, Australians aged 18 and over who have received 2 doses of a vaccine at least 6 months ago are now eligible for a booster shot. This follows advice from Australia's vaccine experts, the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, and approval from Australia's medicines regulator, the Therapeutic Goods Administration. The booster program, Mr President, will roll out directly to people living in residential aged care and disability homes through InReach programs, as of today there's over 500 aged care facilities and quite a few disability sites that have already received those InReach programs. This makes Australia one of the first countries in the world to commence a whole-of-population booster program.
Senator Keneally.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Birmingham. Liberal MP Bridget Archer said she spent the first half of her meeting with Mr Morrison, Senator Payne and Mr Frydenberg crying and apologising, and that she requested that the meeting with Mr Morrison be delayed. Was the Treasurer aware of Ms Archer's request?
The Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Look, I'm not aware of the details of conversations between the Treasurer and Ms Archer in relation to that matter.
Senator Keneally, a supplementary question.
Ms Archer has said that she went to Treasurer Frydenberg's office expecting a one-on-one conversation with him, but that instead he took her to the Prime Minister's office. Did Mr Morrison ask Mr Frydenberg to bring Ms Archer to his office, or was it Mr Frydenberg's idea to ambush Ms Archer with a meeting she was not ready for?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, again, I'm not aware of conversations between the Prime Minister and the Treasurer in relation to such matters. I would note it would not be unusual for the Leader of the Liberal Party to want to engage with parliamentary members of the Liberal Party.
Senator Keneally, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Former Liberal MP Julia Banks has said that when she crossed the floor, Mr Frydenberg, and I quote, played good cop, trying to lure me and ambush me, showering praise on me, declaring we were very good friends while saying I had to meet with the PM. Was this good cop tactic conceived by Mr Frydenberg, or was he directed by Mr Morrison?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, look, I'm aware Ms Banks makes a number of media comments. I haven't seen that particular detail of media comment, but in relation to the consequences of crossing the floor, Mr President, I'm well aware of the difference between the consequences of crossing the floor on this side, the Liberal and National parties.
Minister, resume your seat. Senator Keneally, on a point
of order is direct relevance. The question was not about crossing the floor. It was about the meeting that occurred. There's no way this could be directly relevant to the question that was asked.
Minister, I will bring you back to the question that was asked, but you have the call. I cannot direct a minister how to answer a question.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, Senator Keneally's question indeed did contain references to quotes about the consequences of crossing the floor. And, Mr President, the point I was making in relation to the consequences of crossing the floor is that on our side of the chamber, the Liberal and National parties, members and senators have a right to cross the floor. Yes, you would expect and anticipate that party leaders would wish to discuss that with Liberal or National MPs, but for those opposite, there is no such right. The only consequence there is that their party tosses them out. if they cross the floor. That is a fundamental difference, and it's a difference of which we are all very proud on this side.
Minister, order. Order. Senator McGrath.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne. Can the minister update the Senate on the current situation in the Solomon Islands?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I thank Senator McGrath for his question. Australia is deeply concerned by the recent civil unrest in Honiara. I can advise the Senate that following several days of protests with some violence, there were no significant incidents overnight or this morning. We do continue to monitor the situation very closely, however, and to respond accordingly. We understand there have, regrettably, been 4 deaths during the unrest. A curfew remains in place in Honiara between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. daily. Australia continues to call for calm, an end to violence and for tensions to be resolved peacefully. Our focus is to support stability. We do not take sides in these differences, nor do we take a position on other countries' choices about their diplomatic relationships. Australia has responded as a close friend, neighbour and partner, following a request from the Solomon Islands government under our bilateral security treaty. This is our responsibility under the treaty and the right thing to do in support of our Pacific family. Australian personnel are there primarily to support the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force. Australian Federal Police are working with the RSIPF, along with Papua New Guinean personnel, to conduct community patrols to maintain security. The Australian Defence Force are supporting the RSIPF and the AFP. We acknowledge the professional work of the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force to bring the situation under control. Mr President, the Australian mission in Honiara is operational and all staff and families are safe. I've spoken to the acting head of mission again today. We again advise Australians to avoid protests, to monitor local media, to avoid areas affected by protests and roadblocks, and to follow the advice of local authorities.
Senator McGrath, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Can the minister provide further detail on Australia's support to our friend and neighbour?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator McGrath and also thank Senator McGrath for his interest in these matters in the Solomon Islands. Within 24 hours of the request for assistance from the Solomon Islands government, Australia had responded. The Royal Australian Air Force began flights in support of our response on the 25th of November. As of this morning, we had deployed 45 AFP, 76 ADF and 8 DFAT personnel, in addition to the Australian personnel already, of course, based in the Solomon Islands. HMAS Armidale is scheduled to arrive tomorrow. We are taking every precaution against the risk of COVID-19 transmission. One of the Royal Australian Air Force flights that landed in Honiara yesterday carried 1,280 rapid antigen test kits to ensure no risk is posed by our personnel or those of partners. Australia's support is to contribute to maintaining stability, enabling tensions to be resolved by the Solomon Islands people within their own system.
Senator McGrath, a second supplementary.
Thank you. Can the minister advise the Senate on Australia's engagement with Pacific partners and others in our shared response?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And in addition to Australia's own deployment, we are working closely with regional partners who are similarly committed to a stable Pacific. We welcome the participation of 37 members of the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary who have deployed alongside Australian personnel. We are working with Fiji to mobilise a number of RFMF personnel who are expected to arrive tomorrow. These efforts are also in response to requests from the Solomon Islands government. Australia is also in discussion with New Zealand about further cooperation. I have engaged with my counterparts across the Pacific, and Prime Minister Morrison and Minister Seselja have done the same. Australia continues to engage and work with our Pacific family and like-minded partners as the situation develops. We are strongly committed to peace, security and stability across our region.
Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, Mr President. My question without notice is to Senator Payne, the Minister representing the Minister for Trade. Minister, countries in southern Africa are grappling with the new Omicron COVID variant, while also suffering low vaccination rates. Meanwhile, Australia is set to join World Trade Organization's ministerial meetings soon, with the proposed intellectual property waiver on COVID-19 vaccines on the agenda, which would allow for mass vaccine production across the Global South. The government has stated that rather than support the waiver proposed by India and South Africa, it would try to find a convergence with the opposing countries. Your government is making no effort to galvanise support for a strong waiver. Amnesty International has labelled Australia a passive bystander in light of this. Why is the government taking the coward's way out and refusing to join more than 60 countries to co-sponsor the vaccine waiver as proposed by India and South Africa?
The Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Faruqi for her question. We have been consistent in our approach on the TRIPS waiver, but let me begin by saying, Mr President, that we are also very disappointed that the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference, the MC12, has been postponed owing to the occurrence of the Omicron COVID-19 variant. We've consistently said, Mr President, that Australia will support a TRIPS waiver, and our position has not changed. A waiver can only be passed with the support of all 164 WTO members, and there is no proposal on the table right now that has the required level of support. We are, as I said, disappointed that the conference has been postponed, but we remain committed to delivering an ambitious and meaningful outcome on the waiver. We are working with other countries to find common ground on a solution that will ensure all countries can overcome any intellectual property barriers as they respond to COVID-19 or future pandemics. We are, I would note, Mr President, committed to supplying up to 60 million vaccine doses to our region by the end of 2022, including a number of developing nations, a significant number, including 20 million vaccine doses that Australia has already committed to share with the Pacific and Southeast Asia by mid-2022, an additional 20 million doses from Australia's own supply to be shared by the end of 2022, and up to a further 20 million doses to be procured through a partnership with UNICEF, also to be shared by the end of 2022. And, Mr President, we have already shared more than 9.2 million of these doses across our region as at the end of this month, including 4.6 million doses to Indonesia, 1.5 million to Vietnam, 1 million to Fiji, 700,000 to the Philippines, delivered last week, almost 678,000 to Timor-Leste, over 200,000 to the Solomon Islands, over 200,000 to Papua New Guinea. We have committed $130 million to the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment as well.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Faruqi, a supplementary question.
Minister, Australia's donor funding to the Global COVAX facility is low, very low by global standards. Australia is contributing only $4 per person, compared to nearly triple that by the United States, and many times less than countries such as Sweden and Norway. Why is Australia shunning the COVAX facility with such miserly contributions and failing to do its fair share helping the Global South countries get vaccinated? Do you even care about global vaccine equity?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Caring about global vaccine equity, Mr President, includes delivering on the sorts of commitments that I made explicitly clear in response to Senator Faruqi's previous question. But in the absence of that having been heard at the other end of the chamber, Mr President, let me reiterate it in very clear terms. We are committed to supplying up to 60 million vaccine doses to our region by the end of 2022. 20 million vaccine doses that we've already committed to share with the Pacific and Southeast Asia by mid-next year. An additional 20 million doses from Australia's own supply to be shared by the end of next year, and up to a further 20 million doses to be procured through our funded partnership with UNICEF, also to be shared by the end of 2022. We have already shared over 9 million doses, Mr President, across our region, 4.6 million to Indonesia, 1.5 million to Vietnam, 1 million to Fiji, 700,000 to the Philippines, 677,850 to Timor-Leste, 213,000 to Solomon Islands.
Your time has expired. Senator Faruqi, a second supplementary question.
Minister, last month the World Health Organization reported that just 5 African countries, less than 10% of Africa's 54 nations, are projected to hit their 2021 target of fully vaccinating 40% of their people. Not 2022, 2021, unless they said efforts to accelerate the pace take off. How many more people have to unnecessarily get sick and die from COVID in the Global South before Australia backs the strong TRIPS waiver and properly funds COVAX?
Senator Faruqi, your time has Minister.
I will not have Australia misrepresented as not backing the TRIPS waiver, because that is not true, and you are spreading misinformation in doing that. I will not have Australia misrepresented in relation to our contribution to the international vaccine effort, and most particularly in our region, Mr President, the Pacific and Southeast Asia, which is our backyard. And the contributions that we are making in those countries are changing lives and saving lives.
Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham. How many funds in the Morrison-Joyce government's budget are allocated at the discretion of the minister, and what is their total value?
The Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, I don't have those details immediately to hand, as I'm sure would not be of a surprise to Senator Gallagher. I'm happy to take those details on notice, so far as we can extract that information. As Senator Gallagher well knows, the administration directly of funds occurs across a range of portfolios. The Department of Finance operates the Commonwealth Grant Guidelines and has a role in relation to the approval of those grant guidelines, which are then administered across the relevant portfolio departments and by different ministers, providing support for a range of different services right around the country. Mr President, Commonwealth grants have been used as vehicles, for example, during COVID-19 to provide additional support to early childhood education and care services, to provide one particular example, Mr President, that comes to mind. Indeed, they've also been used as a vehicle by Senator Colbeck in this chamber to help provide additional targeted support to aged care facilities around Australia. So the grant guidelines are used for a range of different functions and purposes in terms of supporting the delivery of Commonwealth assistance. Yes, Mr President, they often support, and I suspect this will be where Senator Gallagher goes, a range of different local or community-related projects, and those projects are done in accordance with those grant guidelines too. But the types of discretion that are provided, the types of non-competitive processes that exist in place, those types of processes are often there, Mr President, to enable swift response by ministers in circumstances such as those that I outlined before, in supporting direct targeted assistance to sectors that need it most at different junctures, for example those in aged care or early childhood during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister confirm that over 8 long years of the Morrison-Joyce government, ministers have allocated 71% of $3.9 billion worth of taxpayers' funds in these discretionary grant funds to coalition seats?
Minister.
Well, Mr President, I can confirm that Senator Gallagher is quoting from what I understand to be an Australia Institute study that has selectively chosen a very small number of Commonwealth grant programs upon which to base its analysis, Mr President. That's the figure that's where Senator Gallagher is drawing her figures from, Mr President, an Australia Institute survey. I imagine she's quoting probably from the report published in The Guardian of the Australia Institute survey. It's quite a virtuous little cycle we've got going here, that the Australia Institute does the report, The Guardian publishes it, the Labor Party asks about it, but of course it's all just selective reporting when it comes to these matters, Mr President. The fact is that in selecting these targeted areas, there's a disproportionate capturing of regional grants, for example, where the coalition holds the vast majority of electorates, Mr President. So it would be a little surprise that the regional program support—
Minister, time has expired. Senator Gallagher,
Thank you,
a
Mr.
second
President.
supplementary.
Can the minister explain why seats held by independents and that the coalition wanted to win back have received an average of $206 per person? Coalition-held seats have received $184 per person, and Safe Labor seats have received just $39 per person. Why are some Australians worth more than others to Mr Morrison?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr. President. Well, I think I can give it a crack in terms of explaining in relation to regional grants programs why it is that coalition seats have benefited overall when you take all electorates across the country more than Labor-held seats, or even why independents might have benefited more. And that, Mr. President, would be the maths of the fact that the coalition holds more regional seats than does the Labor Party. And indeed, in terms of proportionality, the independents have greater representation in some of the regions than they do in some of the urban areas, Mr. President. So in terms of distorted statistics and figures, Mr. President, which is what are being bowled up here, the simple reality of these programs is, yes, they will support Liberal and National Party-held seats to a greater degree because those communities have elected Liberal and National Party MPs across regional Australia, or in some cases they've elected independent MPs. That is simply a function of our parties holding those electorates.
Order. Senator Hughes. Senator Roberts. A question.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. In recent months, more than 1 million Australians have participated in freedom protests around our country, with many not wearing a mask, not socially distancing and mostly being uninjected. Opportunities for person-to-person transmission of COVID runs into the tens of millions, which we're told is inviting mass outbreaks. Yet the only case I know of COVID transmission at a freedom rally was a cluster that occurred in the Melbourne rally, and that cluster was amongst Antifa anti-freedom protesters. Minister, in the last 3 months, how many COVID clusters, that's 2 or more infections, have occurred at freedom rallies?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks, Senator Roberts, for the question. Mr. President, I don't think that there's been any attempts to attribute specific COVID infections to any such public event of that nature, so I don't have, and we don't hold, the government doesn't hold data in relation to that, although it may be that some of that information is held at a state level where the contact tracing processes for COVID-19 are conducted, Mr. President. But can I go back to something that I've put to the chamber on a number of occasions? The whole point of where the government is going in relation to the vaccination program is to get as many Australians as possible to be vaccinated. We know the vaccine works, we know that it's safe, and we know that it supports ourselves in protecting us from COVID-19. We know that it protects our families and we know that it protects our communities. And one of the really fortunate things that we've seen in this country is the willingness of Australians to go out and get vaccinated. In excess of 92% of Australians have now had a first dose. In excess of 86% of Australians have now had a second dose. It's one of the reasons that we are able to start to reopen our economy, to reopen our communities, which is what I think the people who are participating in these protests are looking for. They want to see us be able to get around more freely. And the discipline, the decision to take up a vaccine, which we know is safe, we know that works, is really important, Mr. President. And we continue to monitor circumstances globally, as I said in my answer to the question earlier in question time to Senator Smith, so that we can understand what's happening with new variants. We can take appropriate actions to protect Australians from those new variants while we learn more about them, get to understand the impact that the vaccines might have on those new variants, so that we can keep Australians safe. And we will continue to take all of the actions that we need to do just that.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Roberts, a supplementary question.
Thank you. A European study found the death rate per 100,000 of double vaccinated subjects averaged 2.5 per month, with the uninjected rate lower at 1.1. The government has authorised a third booster shot, so must have modelled death rates against overseas experience and have an anticipated outcome from your booster program. Minister, what is the anticipated death rate for triple vaccinated Australians as compared to unvaccinated Australians?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the things that we've seen here in Australia and around the world, and one of the things that we've been concerned about as the pandemic has continued to progress is the impact on the unvaccinated of the virus. I know that when I was in Japan earlier in the year, the reporting out of the US that I saw on a daily basis was that in the United States it was becoming very much a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Somewhere between 90 and 95% of those in hospital suffering severe symptoms of COVID-19 were actually unvaccinated. Some figures out of New South Wales earlier this year indicated that similar proportions, 90 to 95% of those in hospital with severe illness, severe symptoms of the virus, were actually unvaccinated, Mr President. The data is very clear. The data is very clear. And it shows up in the circumstances of the most vulnerable in this country that the vaccine works.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Roberts, a second supplementary.
The South African Health Minister said on Sky News that the scientist who isolated Omicron never said it would be vaccine-resistant. Angelique Coetzee, the South African Medical Association chair, stated on Fox, "Symptoms are so mild we don't know why so much hype is being driven." Yet Australian media have dialled fear to the maximum, freedoms are again being removed and Big Pharma are raking in billions from boosters. Minister, will the death of the Liberal Party be counted as a COVID death or as self-inflicted?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I suspect a party as proud as the Liberal Party will probably be around for a fair while longer than Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party. So, Mr President, and I look forward to that, Mr President. But can I say, I do agree with Senator Roberts with respect to we need to take the time, take the moment to understand the circumstances of this new variant. That's why the government has taken the proportionate measures that it has done to ensure that we have the time to understand what the impacts of this variant might be with respect to vaccination, with respect to transmission, with respect to the seriousness of its impact on the communities before we continue the processes that we'd undertaken with respect to opening up. That's why we took the appropriate precautionary response at the weekend to say 9 nations will cease access to Australia.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Henderson.
Thank you very much, Mr President. My question is to the Attorney-General, Senator Cash. Can the Attorney-General please outline to the Senate how the Liberal and Nationals government is unmasking and tackling online trolls to protect everyday Australians from harassment and abuse online?
The Attorney-General, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Henderson for the question, and I do acknowledge her keen interest in this particular area. And, Mr President, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, we know that social media has, for far too long, allowed trolls, bots and bigots to weaponise anonymity to strike out at ordinary Australians. That is just unacceptable behaviour. And that is why the Morrison-Joyce government will introduce new laws which are capable of forcing global social media giants to unmask anonymous online trolls and at the same time better protect Australians when they are online. This is a world-first legislation, Mr President, and we will address these pressing issues of online abuse and defamation liability. The legislation, which will go to exposure draft this week, will do the following. In the first instance, provide certainty flowing from the High Court's decision in Fairfax Media and Volla, and we will clarify who is a publisher of defamatory comments on social media, and that will be the social media company themselves. We will also protect Australian social media users from potential liability for comments made by online trolls. We will support Australians who are the subject of defamatory comments on social media to unmask anonymous online trolls, and we will assist Australians to institute defamation proceedings in state and territory courts. We will deem, as I said, the social media providers to be a publisher of defamatory comments on their platform in circumstances where the online troll cannot be identified. Again, Mr President, this is all about protecting ordinary Australians from liability for comments made by third-party users on social media. It is also about ensuring that anyone who operates in the online space is operating in a safe space.
Senator Henderson, a supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President. Why is it important for the government to take strong action against online trolls and ensure social media companies are helping to ensure online safety?
Minister Cash.
Thank you, Mr President. And we know social media use, it is increasing, and it's increasing in Australia. But what that increase in the utilisation of social media has done is bring greater exposure to online harms, and that includes exposure to defamation. We know that social media can amplify the harmful defamatory impact of material posted by online trolls. This includes the use of algorithms, which can push harmful material to users far more quickly than was possible through traditional media. At this point in time, victims have limited to no recourse against the anonymous originators of defamatory comments made on social media. What we will do is we will provide new pathways for victims to quickly and easily identify originators of defamatory material posted on social media. Again, this is world-leading in terms of what Australia is doing to ensure that when you are online, you're in a safe environment.
Senator Henderson, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, with more Australians than ever using and benefiting from social media today, can you please outline what the government is doing about online harms more broadly?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And the Morrison-Joyce government has been leading the way in protecting Australians online. When eSafety was established in 2015, it was the first agency in the world dedicated to protecting citizens from online dangers, such as cyberbullying targeted at children. Through the work of Minister Fletcher with the Online Safety Act and the eSafety Commissioner, we are bringing the rules of the real world to the online world. And this, of course, includes the introduction of a complaints-based removal notice scheme for cyber abuse for adults, based on the model that is in place for children. Our government has also recently released our online privacy code, working to protect our personal data and, in particular, our children's data, and ensure that it is used appropriately. The government also acted quickly to protect Australians from the live streaming of terrorist content through the abhorrent violent material legislation.
Senator McCarthy.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Can the Minister confirm that nearly 2 years after COVID-19 reached Australian shores and with the emergence of a new variant of concern, not one new federal quarantine facility has yet opened its doors?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank the Senator for her question. Mr President, Australia's decisions taken and led by the Prime Minister from the 1st of February last year to close our international borders have been a key feature in terms of Australia's success in protecting Australians from COVID-19, in ensuring that we have saved lives, some estimated 30,000 plus lives compared with the OECD averages in terms of deaths around the world. Alongside that, we've been fortunate to be able, thanks to economic responses, to be able to save businesses, to be able to save jobs, and to be able to ensure that Australia weathers this global storm caused by this global pandemic.
Minister.
Well, yeah.
On a point of order, Senator McCarthy.
Relevance. I've asked specifically about the building of new quarantine facilities.
I'm listening carefully to the Minister's answer. I'll allow you to bring the Minister back to the question. Minister, you have the call.
Thanks, Mr President. Those border closures have served Australia well. The quarantine arrangements that have been associated with those border closures have also overwhelmingly worked effectively and served Australians well as well. In the vast majority of cases, hundreds of thousands of Australians have been able to move back into our country safely and securely. Part of that, Mr President, has been the crucial role that the Howard Springs facility has played in the Northern Territory, which received significant expansion to the 2,000 capacity during this time frame. Mr President, in addition to the work of the Howard Springs facility, work is underway on additional quarantine facilities in Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth, following the encouragement and partnership agreements struck by state governments in each of those jurisdictions. The first of those is scheduled to see beds handed over to the Victorian government by the end of this year. That remains on track and remains the case in terms of providing longer-term capabilities to respond to COVID or other emergencies into the future.
Senator McCarthy, a supplementary question.
Would Australia's defences against the Omicron variant be stronger if Mr Morrison had listened to the experts and built fit-for-purpose national health quarantine?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Australia's defences throughout COVID-19, as I said at the outset, have been incredibly strong. We've shown amazing resilience as a nation, and we've shown great capacity to be able to minimise the loss of life, and whilst minimising the loss of life, to work ourselves into a position as a nation where we are now one of the most heavily vaccinated and most protected populations and nations across the planet. And that, Mr President, is our key protection in relation to COVID-19. We are working on building these additional centres for national resilience. These centres will serve the purpose in continued response to COVID-19, but also, Mr President, they will serve a purpose in response to other future pandemics, natural disasters or emergency situations around the world. It is important in relation to the Omicron variant that we do keep a sense of perspective, as many infectious disease and public health experts have urged, and the government is working through the evidence in relation to that.
Senator McCarthy, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How many more variants of concern will appear on Australian shores before Mr Morrison finally delivers fit-for-purpose national quarantine capacity?
Minister.
Oh, Mr President, I think it is very important for all leaders in this place to keep a sense of perspective in relation to the Omicron variant or indeed other variants that may emerge in the future. As Professor Peter Collignon, infectious diseases physician at the ANU, said, fear is out of proportion to the data at the moment with this new variant. And indeed, as Professor Greg Dorr, epidemiologist at the Kirby Institute, said, the ideal response to uncertainty is to accelerate evidence gathering. It's not to pull the panic levers. Mr President, I would urge those opposite and all to keep that sense of perspective at present. The government has acted in a precautionary way to further tighten border restrictions in relation to a number of nations across the southern part of the African continent. We are continuing to receive regular briefings in relation to this, but it is notable that a number of health experts have highlighted the seemingly mild implications of this variant, and so we ought to all keep it in perspective.
Senator Molan.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience, Senator Mackenzie. Can the Minister update the Senate on what arrangements the Liberal and National Government has in place to ensure we are well prepared for bushfires, floods and other natural disasters this high-risk weather season?
The Minister for Emergency Management, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Molan for his question and his long interest in emergency management matters. The Australian government is well prepared to respond to disasters that may occur during the upcoming high-risk weather season. We've been working closely with states and territories to ensure that all levels of government are ready to respond quickly and effectively. Since September this year, our government, through Emergency Management Australia, has led a national preparedness program with states and territories, industry and non-for-profit organisations so that we've practiced our responses to crises. On the 5th of September, we announced additional funding to support preparedness for the upcoming season, including $2 million for the National Community Education and Engagement program for the Australian Warning System, due to commence this week, $4 million to the Australian Aerial Firefighting Centre to fund the lease of a large air tanker, over $20 million to implement the Australian Fire Danger Rating System to give clear and consistent fire danger information across Australia, and $23 million to enhance EMA's National Situation Room to have the most up-to-date information to hand in a crisis. But we know that these severe weather events are inevitable, and that's why we're even better prepared to respond to disasters once they've happened. We've put in place a new streamlined process for activating the disaster recovery funding arrangements, and that's the primary way we fund recovery following disasters here in Australia. These arrangements are co-funded in partnerships with jurisdictions and delivered by state and territory who have actually requested that assistance. They provide much-needed assistance for immediately after a natural disaster, but we're not just focused on immediate response and recovery, we're also focused on developing resilience, because we know the money spent on building community resilience before a disaster will provide more long-term value than money spent on recovery. Our government's invested heavily in disaster risk reduction with the $600 million Preparing Australia program, and on the 8th of November I announced the release of the grant opportunity guidelines for round 1.
Minister,
and I look forward to applications.
Has expired. Senator Molan, a supplementary question.
Mr President, thank you. With COVID restrictions still in place in some states and territories and a new variant of concern, what has the Commonwealth Government done to prepare for the movement of essential personnel during COVID-related border closures? Minister.
Well, this year the Australian Government, through Emergency Management Australia, has worked with states and territories and industry to agree the COVID-19 Interstate Deployment Protocol. The protocol will facilitate cross-border movement for emergency support specialists and technicians, not only for that immediate response in the middle of a crisis, but for the all-important work associated with cleaning up and rebuilding after the disaster occurs. The updated protocol came into effect on the 8th of November, with endorsement from state territory emergency chiefs as well as the Australian Health Principal Protection Committee. It will mean we can ensure essential workers required to repair critical infrastructure assets like telecommunication, power, energy and health can go where they're needed to restore these essential services to Australians. It will also apply to tradespeople where rebuilding is required and insurers to make it easier for people to access the support they need to repair their homes and get their businesses back up and running after a disaster.
Senator Molan, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. With the high-risk weather season in full force during the last few weeks, particularly in my state of New South Wales, can the minister please update the Senate on what support the government has provided to the communities recently affected by flooding across the country?
Minister.
Well, severe weather events like we've seen over New South Wales over the past week are always distressing for those who experience them. And that's why our government is committed to supporting communities impacted by natural disasters. The recent severe weather event in New South Wales caused damage to critical infrastructure and residential properties, while the very heavy rain has caused flooding to occur and damaging crops right across New South Wales. The Australian and New South Wales government-funded disaster assistance will provide a range of practical assistance measures to help councils, individuals, primary producers, small businesses and charities to recover and get back on their feet. The assistance will help cover the costs associated with the operational response and repairing damaged essential public assets. And additionally, individuals will receive support to get back on their feet, including grants to replace essential household contents or repair structural damage to homes, because our government is ready to stand side by side by these communities and ensure that they recover.
Senator O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr President. And my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. In December 2018, Mr Morrison stood next to Mr Porter and announced he would deliver a National Integrity Commission. But more than 1,000 days later, Mr Morrison has not introduced his own legislation and last week defied the House of Representatives, which demanded an anti-corruption commission. Why did Mr Morrison say he would create a National Integrity Commission when that just wasn't true?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank the Senator for her question. Well, Mr President, indeed, she is correct. The government did commit to build and establish a Commonwealth Integrity Commission. we not only committed to it, Mr President, but we funded some $150 million in budget proceedings for it, Mr President. We have consulted on it. Correct, Senator Cash. We've consulted quite widely in relation to it. Consulted quite widely. Released draft legislation as part of that consultation, Mr President. Indeed, we have 349 pages of legislation to support the implementation of the Commonwealth Integrity Commission, Mr President. We released our bill, Mr President, with the full intentions that we would like to implement our bill, Mr President. The problem, Mr President, lies in the fact that those opposite won't and don't support our bill. That's the problem. They won't agree to pass the Commonwealth Integrity Commission that the government has worked to develop, has released legislation for, has provided funding for. Those opposite aren't interested in a model that ensures integrity, Mr President. They aren't interested in a model that focuses on weeding out corrupt conduct, Mr President. What those opposite want is, of course, to make sure it's as politicised as possible. That seems to be the desire of those opposite, because their whole campaign tactics are about smear and sledging at present. We see that time and time again in the questions they bring into this place, in the nature of their interviews, in the sensitivity with—
Minister, resume your seat. Senator Wong.
I just flag by leave that the Leader of the Government we would give you leave to table your legislation here and now, should you wish.
Is there a point of order?
We would give you leave.
Senator Wong. Minister, you have the call.
Thanks, Mr President. So those opposite not happy with our model, but what's the alternative they've offered? Well, of course, they haven't actually provided a detailed alternative. All we can take is that they want a vehicle for smear, a vehicle for politicisation, but themselves they only have a two-page glossy. Two pages compared with the 349 pages of legislation. Sorry.
Could you please sit down, Senator O'Neill? Those on my left calling time whilst interjecting to the point where I was dealing with the chamber is not helping. Senator O'Neill, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr President. Yesterday, New South Wales Liberal Premier Dominic Perrottet said, and I quote, "ICAC does a very important job. It gets rid of corruption from public life." Why does Mr Morrison disagree with Premier Perrottet?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, we are very happy to support a model for a Commonwealth Integrity Commission that is focused on eliminating corrupt conduct. That is precisely what the legislation we have developed actually does, Mr President. What it does not do, though, is establish kangaroo court-type proceedings that operate in ways to destroy reputations, even, Mr President, when there is no finding, let alone ultimate prosecution in relation to corrupt conduct. Mr President, that's where the line of distinction exists. Now, in Senator Wong and my home state, Mr President, I know that there's been a different approach taken in relation to the role of ICACs. It's a model that works more closely analogous to the one that our government has released legislation for, that operates in a way that doesn't seek to destroy reputations in advance. So there are different models that exist. We've presented one. We invite those opposite to publicly indicate they would support the passage of our legislation.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator O'Neill, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President.
Order.
If only they were in government, yeah.
Order. Senator O'Neill, you have the call.
Last week, senators crossed the floor in defiance of Mr Morrison, and on Thursday, a member of Mr Morrison's own government crossed the floor in the House because of his ongoing refusal to act. Hasn't Mr Morrison completely lost control of the House, lost control of his senators and lost control of his government?
Minister.
Mr President, the answer is no. The answer very clearly is no. But Those opposite are entirely focused on internal political machinations, because that's all they know. It's certainly all that their leader, Mr Albanese, knows. It's all Mr Albanese knows are the politics of smear and the politics inside this parliament. What you don't hear them asking questions about, what you don't hear them pursuing policies on, are the things that matter to Australians. Our government is clearly focused on the 700,000 jobs that we've recreated since COVID-19 struck at its deepest point. Our government is focused on the 133,000 apprenticeships that we have created as a result of our policies. Our government is focused on the delivery of tax cuts that are putting $1.5 billion a month back into the pockets of hard-working Australians, Mr President. We're focused on a $110 billion infrastructure program, on national security through the AUKUS partnership. They're the things we're focused on, Mr President, not the politics of smear like those opposite.
Your time has expired. Senator Abetz.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Families and Social Services, Minister Ruston. How is the Liberal and Nationals government supporting older Australians in their retirement?
The Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Abetz for his question. Well, this government is absolutely committed to finding new and innovative ways to support aged pensioners and self-funded retirees in their retirement. And that's why we're introducing legislation this week to ensure older Australians are supported to use their own resources to maximise their retirement outcomes. We're delivering on our 2021-22 budget measure, enhancing the pension loan scheme with a $21 million reform package. It's important to point out that the pension loan scheme is available to all Australians who have reached pension age, and that includes people who are part pensioners and people who are self-funded retirees. The program can be used for them to top up their retirement income by using some of the equity that they have in their home or other assets, and when their house is sold, the loan is then repaid from those proceeds. The loan amount is paid out fortnightly at the rate of up to 150% of the pension, of the full age pension. Under the budget reform, we are expanding the scheme through the introduction of lump sum payments. From the middle of next year, people using the pension loan scheme will be able to access up to 2 annual lump sum advances in any 12-month period, up to a total of 50% of the maximum annual rate of the age pension. The popularity of the pension loan scheme has grown more than fivefold in less than 2 years, as our expansions to the scheme have allowed more retirees to tap into the equity tied up in their homes to pay for additional living expenses. The School of Risk and Actuarial Studies at the University of New South Wales believe access to lump sum payments will increase the attractiveness of the scheme. We know that home ownership has always been the bedrock of our society, and we want to make sure that we give older Australians the confidence to tap into a small proportion of their home equity to make sure that their retirement outcomes are maximised for their own benefits.
Senator Abetz, a supplementary question.
Yes, there is, Mr President. I thank the Minister for the wealth of information contained in her extensive answer. And can I ask the Minister for further advice, and that is, how has the government supported older Australians throughout the COVID-19 pandemic?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, as we recover from the pandemic, some older Australians are facing new challenges and stresses, such as loneliness and increased social isolation. Be Connected, which runs the Friend Line, and it encourages older Australians who may be lonely and not having anyone to talk to call and have a chat to a volunteer. We know that there's a real need for assistance to alleviate loneliness and social isolation, so programs like Friendline are here to help. And I would encourage all senators in this place to make sure that you let your constituents know, particularly your older constituents, that this service is available to them, to make sure that they have someone to reach out to if they don't have a friend or family member to do so. Throughout the pandemic, we also made economic support payments to more than 2.5 million Australian aged pensioners, who were among the 5.5 million social security recipients to receive one-off payments in 2020-21. These were paid at $750 in both March and July.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Abetz, a second supplementary question.
Yes, there is, Mr President, and I thank the Minister again for another extensive answer, for which I thank her. Can the Minister further update the Senate on how our Liberal National Government is providing pensioners flexibility in their retirement and tackling misinformation?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, our government is focused on ways we can make a real difference in the lives of aged pensioners. We want them to have flexibility to boost their income so that they can choose how they spend their money in retirement. We're doing this through changes to the pension loan scheme as well as the work bonus, which increases the amount a pensioner can earn from work before it affects their pension rate. This is in stark contrast to those opposite who are focused on frightening senior Australians with a false campaign. For the record, can I please repeat again in this place, the government has been very, very clear. The Morrison government has no plan and never will have a plan to force aged pensioners onto the cashless debit card. Senior Australians know that we are the party that can be trusted to protect their interest in retirement, which is exactly what we will do and continue to focus on. We will not scare aged pensioners for political gain.
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, I ask that further questions be placed on notice.
We'll just give a few moments for senators to leave the chamber.
Are there any motions to take note of answers